importantly, we know that the God that we serve is truly worthy. No matter what season we in, no matter what difficulties may bring us, no matter what the climate of the culture is, no matter how crazy our life may be in this season or in that season, we know that God is still worthy to be worshiped. And so today, regardless of our climate, that's what we do. We worship the King. We worship Jesus. We worship a good father, and a good father he is. And so we like to say, as we celebrate Father's Day of our natural fathers, can we also just take a moment to just say Happy Father's Day to the one who's given us life, to the creator of all men. And so I want to say Happy Father's Day to God. Happy Father's Day to my Heavenly Father, who has blessed my life beyond measure, who has far exceeded all that I could ask or imagine and even think of him, because he is truly a good Father. Today, Psalms 109, verse 9 through 10 says, "May his children be fatherless and his wife a widow. May his children wander about and beg, seeking food far from the ruins they inhabit." It was 1990 in Men's Magazine. They ran this editorial in which Asa Baber expressed his belief that earthly fathers' involvement has been ignored and minimized too long. He predicts that judges, legislators, and mothers would wake up and conclude they had missed much by not having dads involved with their children. And he predicted this awakening would come to fruition in the 1990s. Well, it's 2000. And sadly, that realization has not happened, at least in this country. And what is even more sad is that such realization has not happened in the hearts of some fathers. This afternoon, on this Father's Day, I want to talk to you from the subject of fatherlessness, the curse of a society. And hear me closely. This is not a time for women to share the message and try to bash men when I talk about manning the heck up. I am not saying it to bash, but from a place of deep love, compassion, and love for the role and responsibility of fathers. So my message when I say man up and step up and rise up is not a place of bashing, but from a place of a deep love for the role and responsibility of a father, right? And I have this passion for fathers because the world will continue and has continued to downplay our roles. The feminist movement has downplayed our role or seek to downplay the role of fathers in the house. Social media with all the women saying Happy Father's Day today to all the single moms. Me personally, I take that as a disrespect to the role of fathers. And while I understand the sufferings of a single mom and I understand why they do that, no matter how great you are, and moms, you are great, fatherlessness can never be made up by great mother presence. Let me say that again. Fatherlessness, no matter how great of a mother you are, fatherlessness can never be made up by a great mother's presence. See, where there is fatherlessness, there is generational and societal curses and breakdowns, and the only way to fix it is to empower the father and teach the father how important he is and how his absence is destructive. Listen, fatherlessness is a generational and societal curse. And the only way to fix it is to empower the father and teach the father how important he is and how his absence is destructive. So, what better way to empower fathers than to show their importance by spotlighting the reality of their absence or the consequences of their absence? See, if you want to see the value in something, sometimes you have to look at what its absence creates. Right? This is why sometimes it isn't until a person leaves that a knucklehead starts to realize what that person really meant and how valuable they really were in their life. This is why I always tell my daughter, you don't necessarily understand just how important my role in your life is, but one day I'll be gone and it'll finally all kick in just how beneficial I was for being in your life. Oftentimes it's when things are removed that we start to understand the value that it had. Because its absence creates this gap, this absence creates this void, and then you start to realize, wow, I didn't have this void until this thing left. And so that thing was extremely valuable. Fatherlessness is valued. And when we look at what its absence creates, it speaks loudly to the importance of fathers, right? And so when I began to study this topic from the Bible, it blew my mind just how clear it was, how clear as day, that the scriptures repeatedly speak to the fact that fatherlessness is a curse, and it produces oppressed people and communities. Fatherlessness is a curse, and it produces oppressed people and communities. Yep, right out the gate, I went there, right? And I'm not making this up, right? In the Psalms that I read, the psalmist is wishing destruction on one of his enemies. All right, pay attention. He's wishing destruction on one of his enemies. And in wishing destruction on one of his enemies, he is asking that a curse be placed on his enemies. And as he prays that the man be destroyed, in verse 9, he says that the reason he is praying for the man to be destroyed, or the effects of the man dying, is that his children would be fatherless and his wife would be a widow. And so this man who wants to curse his enemy is praying that the man die, that his children would be fatherless and his wife would be a widow. Now, the reason that the absence of the father's death would result, the reason that for the absence of the father is the death, but the results are the same regardless the absence of the father. And what I'm saying is, regardless of why the father is absent, if it's an untimely death, if it's a father who walks away, if it's a single mom who got beef with dad and pushes him away, whatever the reason that the father is not present doesn't necessarily matter, because regardless of why he is absent, right, the reality still is that regardless of the reason for the absence of the father, the result to the family is still the same. Right? Whenever a father is absent, fatherlessness is the outcome to the children. Now that may seem obvious, right? But the understanding of fatherlessness in the Hebrew actually pulls out some really good things, right? See, this Hebrew word is yatam, and it means a child who does not have a father, and from a societal standpoint is considered among the defenseless and or oppressed. So in the Hebrew culture, when a person was fatherless, that child was considered to be among the defenseless and the oppressed. The mother of that child, and understand something, the Bible speaks from assumptions. The Bible is just going to assume that the person who has the child, they're married. So the Bible assumes that we're doing things right. So there's some disconnects here, obviously, right? But so if everything was in a perfect world, the mother or the wife of that father who may have passed away is also defenseless and oppressed. Regardless, the point is that when the father is absent, the family becomes defenseless and or oppressed, right? The understanding is that the child and the family is defenseless when the father is absent. Drop this point on the screen. See, the absence of a father fuels societal oppressions. Now, you may be thinking, nah, I'm stretching that. Oppression, right? You're stretching that, right? But the word oppression in the Hebrew is lahas, and what it means is to oppress, here it is, or minimal survival rates. So when you see that word oppress in the Hebrew, it's talking about somebody that's oppressed, or it holds the notion that this person has a minimal survival rate. And the sense that it speaks to is to keep a person down by injustice, and in that group of oppressed people, widows and fatherless children are mentioned. So when we talk about the oppressed of a society, the Bible always mentions widows and the fatherless, because they are seen, according to the Bible, as having a minimal survival rate amongst a society. Right? We're going to talk about it. How many people have ever made a biblical connection to oppression and fatherlessness? See, a key role of a father biblically is to be a protector. And when the father is absent and then there is no community effort to support the children in the family, the result is the household becomes vulnerable. Results is societal vulnerability. And that is why God, who is for the disenfranchised, puts laws in place to protect the fatherless. If you don't believe that fatherlessness leads to societal oppression, then you have to just look at the laws that God put in place to protect the fatherless and the widow. And in Deuteronomy 24:17, he says, "You shall not pervert the justice due to the sojourner or to the fatherless, or take a widow's garment in pledge." Here's what we see, that God is instructing people to not do injustice against three classes of people: the sojourner, the fatherless, and the widow. The reason for this is because neither would have the protection of a normal family or tribal affiliations. The call to not take a widow's garment in a pledge is instructions to not give loans, but to give a gift, right? Now, why would the widow need a loan? Well, because in that time, the husband was the economical resource. And so when the father is gone, the widow has no means to survive. And so in order to survive, they would go seeking help from people. And God said, for my community of people, do not loan to the widow at the cost of a garment, meaning at the cost of a repayment. Now, this gets interesting because we all know in our communities, right, especially in our urban communities, we got all these buy here, pay here lots, and we got all these payday loans, right? All are taking advantage of the need for economical resources in our communities. And so the people who are in these communities, by the way, the statistics say that we deal heavily with fatherlessness in our communities. And so in our communities, we see systems set up, right, to loan us things at an interest rate that is far beyond any morale. And so what happens, though, because there is a great need, we go to these places and we engage in these immoral loans, right, to survive, right? But all because there's an economical void that exists there in our communities because we have a high rate of fatherlessness. Again, where there is fatherlessness, the family is vulnerable. But God is instructing the community to not take advantage of the vulnerable, the fatherless, and the widow. Why? Because again, when the father is absent, the family is vulnerable. This is a truth that God understood, and it's not a knock on a single mom's strength. I don't want any moms, I hate that I even have to make these caveats because it's Father's Day, but just because I know there's women watching, this isn't a knock saying that women can't hold down economical or jobs that can provide for the family. This is not knocking the strength of a woman, right? This is about empowering the strength of the husband. Here's something we have to understand in this culture. Side note, it is not cool to disempower somebody to empower yourself. And this is what I have struggled with a lot of movements. The struggle that I have with the feminist movement is they're not just okay with empowering women. They want to disempower the man. They want to minimize the role of a man and act like the man is not needed. Horrible, right? This is the problem that I have with individuals when we talk about race reconciliation, and the goal is to disempower the privilege in order to empower ourselves, or tear down the privilege in order to empower ourselves. The problem is we should never have to disempower or tear down another person to empower ourselves. If we are doing that, then we are doing something wrong. And so as I empower fathers, this is not a knock on any woman that may be watching. However, the reality is, and we'll look at this in a minute, is that there is a void that can never be filled by great women or great mothers when there is fatherlessness present. Hope that made sense. But here's the eye opener. Fathers have a serious role. And so absent fathers, petty moms to fathers who are trying to be present, judges and lawmakers that take fathers out of the home, as 90% of the men in prison are fathers. You are exposing children to minimum survival rates. And let's just say it, black children are already at a disadvantage. And then you take the father out of the home or push him out, or you're an absent dad willingly, survival rates now drop very low. And let me prove it. Because according to the National Fatherhood Initiative, here's 5 facts. Involved dads improve the overall emotional and social health and well-being of a child, right? 2, children with involved dads are less likely to be mistreated. 3, children who live with dads do better in school. 4, Teen boys who live with dads are less likely to carry guns and deal drugs. These are statistics that's coming from the National Fatherhood Initiative. The link is at the bottom so you can verify all these stats. And 5, moms, when dads are involved, your parental stress is reduced, right? So if all of that is the benefit of fatherhood, then fatherlessness produces the opposite. Now, for those who may not understand just how this affects the community, if you have a community where absent fathers exist in large numbers, what does that mean? Not only is the child and mother vulnerable, the community becomes vulnerable as well. And so if you have a community where for whatever reason, whether it's unjust prison sentence that take the father out of the household, whether it's government assistance that then keeps fathers out of the household. Because I don't know if y'all know this, but if you have a father who gets a felony and goes away to jail and they may have a child. Now, while they're gone, what happens? Mom gets on government assistance to provide for the family. Maybe they get housing. Let me explain something to you. When that father comes home and they're not married, right? Guess what happens? Felonies are not allowed to stay in government assisted homes. CMHA, if you have a felony, you can't be there. So guess what? That means this father comes home and the system says you cannot bring the family together. Dad can't live here. If dad lives here, now mom loses housing, and then what happens? The poverty cycle continues. That's why I say these systems aren't set up to actually help us. They actually lend to greater fatherlessness, because in Cuyahoga County, I'm just going to say it point blank and clear, Cuyahoga County don't give a crap about dads. They systems don't care about dads. The judges don't care about dads. Cuyahoga County is one of the worst in Ohio when it comes to father presence and support of fathers. Now, done with that rant. If you go back and you do some research, you will see this strategic attack played out in slavery, right? Where they would intentionally sell off the father of a family to a different plantation so that they may weaken the family structure on their plantation and make more docile believers and making the family vulnerable and dependent. And we see this post-slavery with the strategic attack on black men and the war on drugs. Why am I bringing that up? Because we have to understand what father absence does. And if you are a father who is absent, understand what you are doing. If you are a father who is sometimes present and sometimes not, understand what you are doing. If you are a mom who is emotionally hurt and taking it out by keeping dad from the child, understand what you are doing. And the structures that are created to cause father absence, understand what you are doing. Better yet, we must understand what they are doing and fight back and against them. Lastly, to the father who is present, I know you may feel like you don't matter, but you are so important. Stay present, stay active, because you are helping to break curses. Let me say that again. Fathers who are present, I know sometimes you feel like you don't matter. I am a father, and I look at my daughter sometimes because I've made some mistakes in my past, and so my household is divided, meaning my oldest daughter doesn't live in my house with me. And sometimes I look at her and I'm like, you don't think I really matter that much. You know, she don't call me all the time. You know, she be at my house. She call her mom 18 times a day. I don't get a call a week. You know what I'm saying? I only get calls when money's needed, right? And I'll be like, I ask her all the time, I say, do you love me? Because sometimes as a father, we just feel like, do you understand how important I am in your life? And I'll never forget, this is real. I'll just be honest with you. My daughter, I deal with a lot being involved in my daughter's life in her adolescent years. I always push through because I don't know how to be anything but a father. But I'll never forget, it was earlier this year, my daughter decided she wanted to say something crazy to me, and she said it. And she was mad because I wouldn't let her have a boyfriend or something. And so she was like, I think she said something. Well, she definitely said along the lines like, I don't love you. I don't want to see you no more. And I remember how hurt I was, but in my flesh, I called her mom and I was like, tell her don't come around me no more. And I remember her mom just talking to me, you know what I'm saying? Like, that's not really what you want. She's like, you can't. I was so pissed that my flesh wanted to be like, you don't appreciate me and all that I do for you? And you dare to say that you don't love me and that you don't want to be, because I won't let you have a boyfriend? I think it was even pettier than that, honestly. And I just remember Like, my flesh wanted to be like, I'm not even appreciated. So why do I go through the stress levels that I go through with a teenager? And you don't even appreciate me anyway. I'm telling you that story because even though that's how I felt, I had to press through that feeling, realizing that I do matter. And it doesn't matter if sometimes she doesn't understand how important my role in her life is. It doesn't matter if sometimes I feel like her mom and them don't really express the importance of my role in her life. It doesn't matter if I know that the system doesn't understand the importance of the role of a father in a daughter's life. I'm telling you, you matter. And so regardless of how you are treated as a father, stay present, stay active, because you are helping to break curses. Now, let me say this. Love it or hate it, some of the conditions in our black communities will never change until two things happen. First, fathers come home, and by home, I'm not necessarily saying you got to reconcile a relationship with mom. Some y'all don't need to be together, probably healthier, right? But by home, I mean come back into your child's life, right? And if you can come home and restore the structure, the family structure that God put in place. Right. And sometimes that family structure gets restored. If it's not biologically, it's through marriage. But regardless, is that fathers need to come back. Right. Secondly, the men in the communities need to step up where there is father absence. Now, you may be like, that ain't my responsibility. But let me tell you the heart of God. Isaiah 1:17, God says to the community of Israel, learn to do good. Seek justice, correct oppression, bring justice to the fatherless, plead the widow's cause. In other words, he calling his community to protect the fatherless. Today, that means the men step up and make sure the child does not become a statistic or mistreated by society. And as the psalmist continues his curse, you see what else happens? The child becomes hungry and begging for food. And so poverty becomes part of that child's life. See, father absence also leads to economical struggle. Verse 10 says, man, may his children wander and beg, seeking food from the ruins they inhabit. The Bible says that where they at has become ruins. You got to understand, this is the condition. The man is wishing a curse. He wants the man to die. And when the man dies, the results of his death or his absence is that his children become fatherless. The mother becomes a widow. His children now wander around and beg, seeking food from their own ruins. And so to wander in the Hebrew means to move around aimlessly without a destination. And so because of a father's absence, the children roamed, begging and seeking food. This is why the Bible mentions that fatherlessness, anytime we see poor and taking care of the poor and clothing the hungry, we also see that word orphan or fatherlessness in that same sentence. See, part of the father's role biblically was to provide and care for his children. And because of the setup of the family, back when the father was absent, the economic resource was no longer present. Now, today is different. Women work. They make good money. However, there is still an economic struggle on the single mom. Sometimes it results in 2 jobs or welfare, etc., to provide for the child. You know what happens when you take a single mom who needs to now match the economical deficit that exists because there's not a father in the household? You know what happens to mom? Mom gets a second job. You know what happens to a single mom who's raising boys and now has to get a second job, which means they're not in the home as much as they need to be? You know what happens? Well, now either an older child begins to raise the children, or that child is left alone enough and he turns to the streets to begin to raise him and nurture him and love him. It's a cycle that continues to happen, but it all starts when the father is not present in the household. Let's look at some more stats to support the curse of the psalm. According to the National Fatherhood Initiative, children with absent fathers are 4 times greater for risk of poverty. 4 times greater. By the way, 1 in every 4 children in Ohio is impoverished or dealing with single motherhood, fatherlessness, right? Children with absent fathers have a 4 times greater risk for poverty. The presence of dads provides economic stability for the child. And I know also, side note, there's somebody that's like, not the presence of my baby daddy. Again, we're going to assume we're talking about, when I say present, I don't mean like they show up with their face. Present and active. active, meaning they are actually involved. They are actually beneficial to the child. So I'm not just saying, hey, he come get them on once a month. I'm talking about present active dads. When present and active dads become an economic stability. Why? Because they're present and active, and so they provide economical support, right? Sometimes they can't, but they do what they can. Anyway, so check this out as we close. The psalmist not only wanted to see the man destroyed, but his family destroyed. And so to do this, he wanted the man to die. In other words, he wants the man to be absent. Here it is. So that the family would be destroyed. He said, let this man die. That his children will be fatherless. His wife would be a widow. His children would wander and beg for bread. And then verse 11 says that the creditors will come and take all that he has. And then in verse 12 it says, and that nobody will show kindness to his children. And then in verse 13 it talks about his generation will be wiped out. All of this because the father is absent. And again, it's because of death here. But it doesn't matter the reason. The reality is still the same. If there's absence of a father, there are curses to the family. The family becomes vulnerable. And so when we look sometimes at the conditions of our communities, and we look at the fact that the single mother percentage in our county is so high, and then we look into our urban communities and we see some of the cycles of that we see happening, we can link this to fatherlessness. And sadly, this is what we see. Families of generations destroyed because of the curse of fatherlessness. And many things can play into that. But my point of bringing this stuff out is to say to a dad that single mother, great mother, two mothers can't replace you. I don't support two mothers. I'm just saying this is the thought of society, right? It can't replace you. We cannot be okay with saying she got it. She don't have it. I don't care how independent Neil made her feel. She don't have it. She's going to do her best. She's going to be great at it, but she cannot be what you were created and meant to be. God created mom and dad for a reason. And so she can never be that. And we have to get out of this mindset like, whatever, she can just take care of it then. She can't take care of it. Biblically, your role is much greater than society and the feminist movement would have it to be. And we can look at what your absence brings to prove it. Fathers matter. All dads matter. And so on this Father's Day, I want to do three things. I want to call back into fatherhood those who have abandoned their role, because you are important. And your absence is placing a curse on your children. And here's the thing. Curses, again, cannot be broken by having a greater welfare system and greater women. Curses are broken when things are reversed. So the thing that produced the curse must also end the curse. And so I say to you, break the curse on your family. And by doing so, you help break the curses on our communities. If you have neglected your children, if you have walked away from your children, I am calling you back to fatherhood. But most importantly, I want to honor the dads who are present. You may be broken or together households, but you are present and active. And so everything I mentioned was not to beat you up, but to show you just how powerful and important your presence is. You are making a lasting difference in your children's life, and you are protecting them from being cursed. And lastly, I want to honor my father. Yay. Leonard Tank Sr. And my story is not the typical story, because I was raised by my dad. Mom struggled with some things, and it caused her to not be active in my adolescent and partially teen years. But I was raised by my dad. My dad was serving 5 years in jail when I was born. And when he got out, he left the streets. He got custody of his children, and he worked to give us a better life. And a lot of times when people hear my horror stories, I was riding around with my boy, and he was like, wait, you was raised by your dad? He was like, man, your story, you wouldn't think that your dad was in your life. And I was like, yeah, I know. My horror stories wasn't because my father wasn't present and active. It's because I wanted to be and have something that my dad was fighting to pull us away from, right? But my dad never left. He was hard on me, for sure, but he never left. And so I wanted to honor you, Dad, because when people ask me, even though my daughters, two of my daughters may come from separate households, when people ask me how I press in, how do I stay in, how do I, no matter what it costs for me to be in my children's life, how do I press through? I tell them, because all I know is that men take care of their children, because I was raised by a man. And so I love you, I salute you, and I love you. And I love all the fathers out there being curse breakers and family protectors. And so happy Father's Day. And don't let nobody ever again downplay the importance of your presence. You are important. You matter. God created you to be a leader to your family. And so I hope what you heard today was not a beat up or a knock. But I wanted to express what happens when we're not present, to show just how important we actually are. My hope and my prayer is that we would just become curse breakers. Curse breakers in our communities, curse breakers in our households. And you can do that by simply being present.
The Spirit of the Lord is here. Overflow in this place. Fill our hearts with your love.